By the time the sirens faded, Lydia Hart had lost 40 years in 40 minutes. The air smelled of smoke and memory, thick and unreal. Her house, her husband's laughter, her son's childhood drawings, her entire history was now a trembling orange glow at the end of the street. She stood barefoot on the curb, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Someone draped a blanket over her shoulders, but she barely noticed. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell's porch light flickered, throwing long shadows over the crowd. Lydia felt strangely calm, as if her body hadn't yet told her mind that everything was gone. When the fire chief approached, his words blurred into the noise of crackling wood. Total loss was all she caught. It echoed inside her until it became a kind of silence. Her name was Lydia Hart, 65 years old, retired bank teller from Savannah, Georgia. She thought she had survived the hardest things life could offer. She had buried her husband, raised her son alone, and paid off her house penny by penny. But that night, watching it burn, she didn't know that losing everything was only the beginning. Before the fire, Lydia's days moved with quiet rhythm. Each morning she brewed coffee in the same chipped mug her husband Henry had used for 30 years. She'd sit by the kitchen window, the one that framed her hydrangeas in soft morning light, and listen to the gentle hum of Savannah waking up. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Steady, familiar, stitched together with the comfort of routine. The old house had character. Floorboards that sighed when she walked, a screen door that creaked like an old friend. Every mark in that home told a story. On the pantry door were pencil lines where she'd measured her son Drew as he grew. The highest one still made her smile. He was 12 when she drew that line, grinning proudly in his new sneakers. Sometimes she'd talk to Henry's photograph. On the mantel, telling him about her day or about the neighbor's cat that kept stealing her roses. The house felt full then, alive with memories, laughter, and echoes of love that time hadn't managed to erase. She had no idea that within a single afternoon, every one of those little pieces of normal life would vanish. Not stolen, not misplaced, just gone, like breath on a cold window. It began with a faint, unfamiliar smell, something sharp, metallic, and wrong. Lydia frowned, thinking maybe she'd left the iron plugged in. The afternoon sun spilled through the lace curtains as she crossed the living room, her slippers soft against the rug. Then she saw it, a shimmer in the air, a pulse of orange behind the drapes. When she pulled the curtain back, heat rushed out like a breath. The wallpaper was already blistering, flames crawled upward, greedy and fast. For a heartbeat she stood frozen, her mind blank except for one thought. This can't be happening. The smoke alarm stayed silent. Later, she would learn its battery had died months ago. That tiny neglect would cost her everything. The smoke thickened, blackened, choking. She coughed, eyes stinging, fumbling for her phone. It slipped from her hands, clattering across the tile. She could barely see it now, the air swirling gray. Somewhere, glass shattered, a window giving up, and the fire roared louder, feeding on oxygen. Her instincts took over. Purse on the counter. Back door, run. She didn't remember unlocking it, only the sudden shock of cool air against her face as she stumbled into the yard, gasping. Behind her, the kitchen window exploded, sending sparks into the twilight. Neighbors were shouting. Someone was on the phone with 911. Mrs. Caldwell's arms were suddenly around her, trembling and solid at the same time. "Oh, Lydia, your house." The sirens came, distant at first, then deafening. Firefighters poured water over what used to be her life. She watched helplessly, barefoot in the grass, as flames devoured 40 years of photographs, recipes, and laughter. When the chief finally walked over, stood on his face, he didn't need to speak. Lydia already knew. The house where she had built her world was gone, and the only thing left standing was her own stunned heartbeat. By sunrise, the fire was out, leaving behind a shell of blackened beams and smoke that curled lazily into the pale morning sky. The house that once smelled of cinnamon and old books now smelled of metal and ruin. Lydia stood wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching firefighters coil their hoses, their faces tired and kind. An insurance adjuster arrived before noon, clipboard in hand, his tone brisk and professional. "Total loss," he repeated, as if it were a math problem instead of a life. He talked about depreciation, coverage limits, and paperwork she'd need to sign. Lydia nodded at the right moments, though his words blurred together into static. $90,000, maybe less. That's what 40 years came down to. She looked at what was left. A warped piece of the dining table where Henry once read the newspaper. A melted picture frame that had held Drew's kindergarten photo. A single silver spoon glinting weakly in the ashes. The pantry door where she marked her son's height was gone completely. Mrs. Caldwell brought her a thermos of coffee and a quiet hug. "You can stay with me tonight," she whispered. But Lydia shook her head, her voice small. "Thank you, but I need to think." What she didn't say was that she had no idea where to go next, or who, if anyone, would open their door. By the second morning, exhaustion had settled deep in Lydia's bones. Her phone was gone, melted in the fire, so she borrowed Mrs. Caldwell's to make the call she'd been dreading. Drew answered on the third ring, his voice warm but distracted. "Mom, everything okay?" "There was a fire," she said quietly. "The house, it's gone. I need a place to stay, just until the insurance comes through." A pause stretched between them, long enough for her stomach to twist. Then he said, "Of course, Mom. Come on over." Relief washed over her like rain after drought. She would have a roof again, her son's roof. The drive to Drew's suburb felt endless. The cab turned into a neighborhood of wide lawns and perfect symmetry. Every house freshly painted, every hedge trimmed within an inch of its life. When she reached his driveway, she sat for a moment, steadying herself before knocking. The red door opened before she could lift her hand. "Mom," Drew said, smiling but uneasy. Behind him stood Brooke, his fiancée, all poise and polish, white jeans and a silk blouse. "Lydia, I'm so sorry," Brooke said, but her eyes flicked toward the small suitcase in Lydia's hand. Such a tragedy. Inside, the house gleamed. White sofa, glass tables, not a speck of dust. Lydia perched on the edge of a chair, feeling like a smudge in a painting. When she asked to stay a few weeks, the air shifted. Brooke reached for Drew's arm. "We love you, Lydia," she said sweetly, "but we really need our space. We're still building our life together." "I wouldn't be in your way," Lydia insisted. "I can cook, help around the house." Drew cleared his throat. "Maybe a short stay at one of those extended stay places. I can help with a few hundred." "A few hundred?" As if she were a stranger needing gas money. Lydia looked between them, the silence suddenly heavy. "You're saying no," she said at last. Brooke's smile tightened. "We just think it's best for everyone." Lydia stood, her voice steady. "For everyone, but not for me." That night, Lydia checked into a budget motel off the highway. The sign buzzed weakly, half the letters burned out. Her room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. The walls were thin enough that she could hear someone arguing through the vent. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed, staring at the two plastic-wrapped cups by the sink. Everything she owned now fit inside one small suitcase and her purse. She washed her only outfit in the sink and hung it on the shower rod to dry. The air conditioner rattled, coughing dust. When she finally lay down, the mattress was so hard it made her back ache. But at least it was quiet enough for memories to return uninvited. From her purse, she pulled out a small, worn business card. The ink was faded, the corners soft from age. Thomas Beckett, it read, with a Savannah area code she wasn't sure still existed. On the back, in her own handwriting from decades ago, she had written, "Don't forget." Tom, her first love, the man who once promised he'd come back for her. She'd carried that card through marriage, motherhood, and widowhood, never knowing why she couldn't throw it away. Now, with nowhere left to turn, Lydia wondered if the past might be the only place left to go. By the third night, Lydia had run out of ways to stretch her hope. The motel clerk hinted that the room was booked for the weekend and she'd have to check out by noon. She sat at the small table, the business card in front of her, lit by the yellow glow of the lamp. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, half expecting it to be disconnected. It rang once, twice, then a voice, deeper now, steadier, but unmistakably his. Thomas Beckett speaking. For a moment, Lydia couldn't breathe. "Tom, it's Lydia Hart. I don't know if you remember." "Lydia," he said softly, cutting her off. Just her name, but it carried 40 years of memory. Words spilled out before she could stop them. "My house burned down. I lost everything. I didn't know who else to call." "Where are you?" he asked, his tone sharp with concern. "A motel off Route 17, the Seaside Inn." "Stay there," he said. "I'm on my way." "Tom, you don't have to." "Lydia, I've waited half my life for you to need me. Don't hang up." An hour later, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. Through the windshield she saw him, older, yes, gray at the temples, but still unmistakably Tom Beckett. When he stepped out and smiled at her, it felt like sunlight breaking through smoke. Tom opened the car door for her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come on," he said gently. "You've been through enough for one lifetime." The drive wound through familiar, low-country roads, past marshland and live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Lydia watched the scenery blur by, still too stunned to speak. Every so often Tom would glance at her, making sure she was real and safe. His house sat on the edge of a quiet inlet, a graceful blend of wood, stone, and glass that caught the morning light like it had been built to hold it. It wasn't flashy, it was grounded, timeless, much like the man himself. Inside, it smelled of cedar and lemon polish. Family photos lined the hallway, none of them hers, yet. In the kitchen, sunlight poured across marble counters and a long oak table scarred with use. "Sit," Tom said, rolling up his sleeves. "You need a meal that didn't come from a vending machine." He moved with quiet confidence, chopping vegetables, heating broth, stirring a pot with care. Lydia watched, remembering a boy who once burned pancakes at a campground but insisted they were just caramelized. When he set a bowl of homemade soup before her, she could barely swallow the first spoonful. Warmth flooded her chest, spreading to the places she hadn't realized were frozen. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," Tom replied. "Just eat, you're home now." The first few days felt like walking through someone else's dream. Tom had given Lydia the guest suite, a bright room overlooking the water with pale curtains that danced in the breeze and a bathroom big enough to echo. She kept her suitcase closed, afraid to unpack, as if accepting comfort might make it vanish. But Tom had a way of weaving her gently into his life. Each morning he made coffee and left her cup by the window. "Cream, no sugar, right?" he'd say, remembering after 40 years, as if no time had passed. They ate breakfast on the porch, the marsh glimmering gold in the distance, the air filled with the soft click of her spoon against the cup. By the end of the first week, Lydia found herself humming again. She cooked dinner one evening, chicken and dumplings, the way her grandmother used to make them. Tom took a bite, closed his eyes and smiled. "I haven't tasted home like this in years," he said. The words settled deep inside her. For so long she had felt invisible, needed, perhaps, but rarely seen. Here, every small act mattered again, the coffee, the meals, the shared silences. They began walking the property together at dusk. Tom showed her his greenhouse filled with orchids, each one labeled with patient care. Lydia touched a leaf, still damp from misting. "You kept them alive all these years," she said. He looked at her quietly. "I was waiting for someone to share them with." And for the first time since the fire, Lydia believed she might still be more than what she had lost. 2 weeks later, Lydia's phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen since the fire. "Drew?" She hesitated before answering. "Mom," he began, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. "I've been worried. You disappeared. Where are you staying?" "I'm with a friend," she said. "A friend? Who?" His voice sharpened with suspicion. "His name is Tom Beckett. He's an old friend from Savannah." Went silence. Then Mom, you can't just move in with some man you barely know." Lydia took a slow breath. "I know him better than you think. He's been kind to me, something I needed when you couldn't offer it." Drew sighed, the sound of guilt mixed with confusion. "Brooke and I talked. Maybe we overreacted. If you want, you can come stay in the guest room until you find something permanent." Once that offer would have made her cry with gratitude. Now it only sounded like damage control. "That's generous, Drew," she said softly. "But I've already found a place where I'm treated like family." He started to protest, but Lydia's tone held firm. "Son, love isn't measured in square footage, it's in respect. When you learn that, we can talk again." Before he could reply, she ended the call, her hands trembling not from anger but release. For the first time in years, she had chosen herself, and it felt like freedom. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the marsh grass in golden rust. Lydia and Tom had fallen into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, like a song they'd once known by heart. One evening, as the sun melted into the water, Tom turned to her and said, almost casually, "Lydia, let's stop pretending this is temporary. Marry me." She laughed softly, thinking he was joking, but his expression stayed steady. "I lost you once," he said. "I'm not risking it again." They married in his backyard on a crisp November morning. The ceremony was simple, just the pastor, Tom's longtime friend Marcus, and Mrs. Caldwell, who had driven from Savannah with tears in her eyes. Lydia wore a light blue dress that caught the wind. Tom wore a gray suit that made his hair look silver instead of gray. They held hands beneath the live oak, its branches arching like a blessing. Lydia had mailed Drew an invitation, no +1. He came, standing quietly at the back, watching his mother speak volume. She'd never imagined saying at 65. When Tom kissed her, Lydia saw her son wipe his eyes just once, quickly. After the ceremony, they ate lemon cake in the garden, laughing like old friends. There was no music, no crowd, only peace, and for Lydia, peace was the rarest kind of joy. The weeks that followed felt like sunrise after a long storm. Lydia awoke each morning to the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen and the sound of Tom whistling off-key as he read the paper. The framed business card sat on his desk now, beside a photo of them taken under the live oak on their wedding day. The words "Don't forget" had faded, but the promise had not. Some days they worked in the garden together, hands dirty, laughter light. Other days they sat on the porch, watching herons glide low over the water, saying nothing at all. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full, comfortable, alive. The insurance company still sent letters, thick envelopes that once would have filled Lydia with dread. Now she opened them without fear. The numbers didn't matter anymore. She already had what she needed. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were dishes to wash, bills to pay, and days when her back ached. But it was real. And for Lydia, real was more than enough. Looking back, Lydia sometimes thought about that night, the one when the fire took everything. It had felt like an ending. Now she knew it was a beginning dressed in smoke. Losing her house had stripped away everything she thought she needed, leaving only what truly mattered: courage, kindness, and the will to begin again. If there was one lesson she wanted to pass on, it was this: check your smoke detectors, yes, but also check your heart. Make sure it's still open. The people who truly care will show up, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Another truth she learned was that asking for help doesn't make you weak. It takes strength to reach out, to say, "I can't do this alone." And when someone reaches bang, hold on. Finally, she discovered that love doesn't expire with age. Sometimes the universe holds on to a promise until you're ready to receive it. For Lydia, the fire didn't destroy her story. It rewrote it with grace, gratitude, and a second chance to be seen. One evening, as the sky turned the color of copper and rose, Lydia stood on the back porch with Tom. The air smelled faintly of salt and honeysuckle. Inside, the framed business card caught a glint of the setting sun. Tom slipped his arm around her shoulders, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The past, the loss, the waiting, it had all led here. Lydia smiled softly. "Sometimes the fire isn't the end," she whispered. "Sometimes it's the match that lights your way home." If Lydia's story touched your heart, tap like, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your story might light another path too.